Hello there, my name is Esther and I'm going to be exploring Old Greer County, a journey through time. In 2022, I decided to explore the far southwestern corner of Oklahoma. Since I didn't know very much about that area, my husband and I visited it 6 times. All the photos in this presentation are from Old Greer County and western Kiowa County, except the 4 buffalo, 1 prairie dog, and the pronghorn photos. We stayed at a cabin at the Quartz Mountain State Park 5 out of the 6 times and met many of the interesting residents. We also did a breeding bird atlas surveys in Harmon, Greer, and Kiowa counties. For example, one morning we were driving down the road and I spotted a bird. I slammed on the brakes, backed up, and my husband was looking around wondering what the heck. And, well, I found this bird. See the wire going across the road? And there it was, sitting on the wire. On closer examination, it turned out to be a common nighthawk. These birds sleep during the day, so he was busy taking a nap. And then in the evening, they go out and they hunt birds. And we also stopped at several museums, Hollis, Mangum, and Atlas. I looked up several book resources, trying to find out more about the history of the area. The Historic Atlas of Oklahoma, the 4th edition, was one. Oklahoma, A History was another. From Mounds to Mammoths, a field guide to Oklahoma prehistory. Also, Geography of Oklahoma. And then the field guide to Oklahoma plants. I also checked the internet. The Encyclopedia of Oklahoma History and Culture had many, many articles, as you can see here. It's an excellent resource if you are wanting to learn more about Oklahoma history. Other internet resources were Susan Bradford's Welcome to Greer County, Oklahoma Territory. Also, the OSU Extension had a wonderful pamphlet on Oklahoma native vegetation types, E-993. On the webpage, Oklahoma's Historic Places Database.blog, it had many interesting historical places you could visit. John Keatington edited a guide to birding in Oklahoma, and this has a lot of interesting places you can go birding. Also, you can check Travel Oklahoma. The Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation has made 13 Great Plains Trails of Oklahoma, which comprise of wonderful places to go visit for scenic and birding opportunities. Route number 12, Quartz Mountain Birding Route, was in our area. So, where is Old Greer County? What are its ecoregions? What are some of the factors affecting communities? Who are the prehistoric inhabitants and climates? What happened when the Europeans arrived? And then the Supreme Court. Finally, we get to 2022. Water resources, rusty roads, Quartz Mountain, and then finally plan a visit yourself. So where is Old Greer County? Well, according to the Adams-Honest Treaty of 1819 between Spain and the United States, the international boundaries are on the west side, the 100th meridian, and the other boundary is the south cut bank of the Red River. Oh, we've got a problem here. There are 4 forks of the Red River. The North Fork Red River, the Elm Fork Red River, the Salt Fork Red River, and finally, the Prairie Dog Town Fork Red River. Which one is the boundary? Susan Bradford made this wonderful map of the whole area. Here down at the bottom, you can see the Prairie Dog Town Fork of the Red River going east and west. Then just north of that is the Salt Fork going east, and then it turns south, goes right through Jackson County, and joins the Prairie Dog Town Fork. The Elm Fork Red River goes straight east and west. And finally, up at the north, coming into Oklahoma around I-40, is the North Fork of the Red River. And it meanders east, and then it kind of wanders around south and a little further east until it finally joins the South Fork Red River. Today, this comprises of the southern half of Beckham County, which we did not explore. Also on the west side is Harmon County, Greer County is in the middle, and on the south is Jackson County. All of this area from the North Fork Red River down to the Prairie Dog Town Fork of the Red River was named Greer County by the Republic of Texas. What are the ecoregions of Old Greer County? Well, to find this out, you can go to the United States Environment Protection Agency, and they've listed out all the ecoregions. They have level 3, and then level 3 is divided into level 4 ecoregions. So starting over here in this dark orange area, that is a level 3, the southwestern tablelands. And here's a photo of some of the landscape that we had in that area. Going on to the light orange, that's the Central Great Plains. And this ecoregion goes clear on up into Kansas. However, on this particular area, you have up here right along the North Fork Red River, the Philistine sand dunes. And these are just huge sand dunes. And if you drive off into them, you're going to get stuck. Then along the Elm Fork Red River and skipping south to the Prairie Dog Town Fork of the Red River is the Red Prairie ecoregions. In between, we have the Red River Tableland area. And popping up here and there are the Quartz Mountains. Now, the Quartz Mountains are actually the western part of the Wichita Mountain Range. And as you're driving from Lawton to Altus along Highway 62, you will see various places where this mountain crops up. So how do you find level 3 and level 4 ecoregions? Well, if you enter an item into iNaturalist and you go over to details and pop that down, here is your level 3 ecoregions down here, and then up here you can find your level 4 ecoregions. So what are some of the factors affecting plant and animal communities? Well, we have geological formations, soil, rainfall, and temperature. Once upon a time, Oklahoma was an ancient sea, and during that time, sediment layers were deposited, as you can see in this cut bank area. There were a lot of different layers in a long time. Then about 525 million years ago, granite was formed underground. Around 300 to 250 million years ago, the granite was pushed up and up and up until rocky islands appeared in the sea. Over time, erosion occurred until we have the mountains that we know today. And you can find out much more about how this happened in the Museum of Western Prairie in Altus, or at the Headquarters Mountain Hiking Trail and Butterfly Garden in the town of Granite. What about elevation? Well, in Norman, the elevation is about 1,100 feet above sea level, whereas in Beckham County, at Eric, it's 2,000 feet above sea level, which is almost twice as high. Greer County is a little bit lower. Quartz Mountain, the area around it, is 1,800. Mangum is 1,700, and Granite is 1,600. So it's starting to drop in elevation. Harmon County on the western side is also pretty high at 1,600 feet above sea level. But by the time you get down to the southern county, Jackson is starting to drop even more. Altus is still almost 1,400 feet, and El Dorado is 1,400 feet above sea level. Well, what kind of soil do we have in this area? I'm not a soil scientist, and I really can't explain this very well. So you need to go to the County Extension Bulletin E-993 to learn more about that. While I was there, I noticed, though, on soil, some places didn't have hardly any soil at all. Other places, you had this beautiful dark loam soil, but it was more of a sandy texture. Still, it was not sand dunes because it was nice and firm underneath. And then in other areas, the sand was more of a red-colored area. But still, again, it was not sand dunes. It was just firm underneath. But around Quartz Mountain, they had actual sand dunes. I was surprised when I was looking at my slides to realize that some of these sand dunes were white and others were red. What about rainfall? Well, when we were in the western part in Harmon County, I was so surprised. The wheat was only a foot tall and it was ready to harvest. Well, that explains it because the rainfall is 22 to 24 inches annually, so they don't have very much moisture. On the eastern side of Old Greer County, the wheat was a little bit taller, 18 inches. And again, the rainfall there was a little bit more, about 26 to 28 inches annually. What about temperatures? Well, this area has over 100 days with a mean annual temperature of 90 degrees Fahrenheit or higher. That's 3 months above 90 degrees, so it's kind of warm down there. The all-time high temperature of 120 degrees Fahrenheit is held by 5 different towns in Oklahoma. Altus had 2 days on July 19th and August 12th in 1936, whereas Tipton, which is a bit south of Altus, had the temperature on July 27th in 1994. The growing season is over 215 days or 7.5 months, except in Harmon and Beckham counties, which have 205 days or 6.8 months. So they have a nice long growing season. Who used to live here? The prehistoric inhabitants and climates in this area. This is a very interesting area of discovery. Dates from then until modern times can be different according to how an author is grouping events, and can also change according to recent discoveries. Sometimes authors have overlaps on when they date the different areas. Dates are measured differently, and I had to learn to watch out for this. 4,000 million years ago, or BP, before present, equals 2,000 BC or BCE, before Common Era. So this isn't important until you get closer to modern times. Dinosaurs roamed Oklahoma until 66 million years ago, and then due to a catastrophic event, they disappeared. Following that, quite a bit later, we had the Great Ice Age. But those Ice Age glaciers did not come into Oklahoma. Instead, Oklahoma had mammoths and Paleo Indians, and the Indians used spears to hunt the mammoth and other great game. In Kiowa County, a mammoth was found at the Cooperton site with spear points and is dated about 21 to 17 years before present. These were followed by the Clovis hunters between 10 to 9,000 BC. By then, the climate had changed. It was 10 degrees cooler in summer and 10 degrees warmer in winter. The Clovis hunters hunted mammoths, and also at the same time, they had saber-toothed tigers and small horses, etc. All of these became extinct. Around 8,800 years to 8,200 years BC, the Folsom culture was in the area. These people hunted bison and tecumseh, which is the same as our bison, except it was a lot larger. They used spear points made from flint from Austin and Amarillo, Texas, and yellow jasper from northwest Kansas. Then the giant bisons became extinct, and the Folsom culture went away. By the time 7,000 BC to 2,000 BC arrived, people were hunters and collectors. At this time, we had the modern buffalo and other plant and animal communities much like ours. Inhabitants traveled seasonally as available food sources changed. In the beginning, the climate was much more like ours, except until the altithermal period came. And the dates for this is quite varying, but the worst part of this seems to be about 5,000 BC to 3,000 BC. During this time, the climate was arid and hot and very harsh desert-like environment. It was not a good time to live. Buffalo populations declined, so inhabitants hunted rabbits and pronghorns. Finally, the rainfall increased and eventually the climate stabilized. Very, very gradually, the buffalo herds increased. Until around 1500 BC, inhabitants became dependent on the bison. Large-scale communal bison kills occurred using an attila attached to a spear. This is a little device that they put at the end of a spear so they could throw it even further. These people harvested native plant seeds in the fall and ground them into meal or a paste-like dish. They gathered many different plant species. One familiar plant family is the common sunflower. We don't know when or where domestic gardening began, but semi-tropical plants from Mexico began being cultivated and moved north into Old Greer County area. Somebody discovered that corn was an excellent crop. The seeds didn't disperse all over everywhere like many other plants, and you could let it dry them out and they would stay good to eat for a long time. After growing corn, then people added beans and squash, and these became staples. So by 1 AD to 500 AD, it was the beginning of agriculture in the Old Greer County. By this time, climate had stabilized and rainfall had increased. These people built semi-permanent houses. Here in the Museum of Western Prairie and Altus is a model of one of the houses that people lived in. They started using bows and arrows. Women made pottery for food prep and storage. They also traded goods with other groups. I was surprised to learn that native agriculture was more developed in western Oklahoma than in eastern Oklahoma. And now, for the first time, inhabitants are linked to modern native societies. So then they had actual agricultural villages. Moisture conditions were prevalent, but of course we still had droughts and violent storms. People lived in an intensive agriculture economy at settled communities along forks of the Red River, Washita River, and other waterways. And this was between 800 AD to 1400 AD. In 1400 AD, then we started having drought and cooler temperatures, known as a Little Ice Age. This climate favored the buffalo herds, but it shortened the growing season. And so inhabitants developed two different lifestyles. The consolidated villagers had an agricultural lifestyle, but they would leave 2 to 3 months to hunt buffaloes. On the other hand, the communal hunters lived in teepees and followed the buffalo herds. Community life was changed by arrival of tribes from the Rocky Mountains, Kiowa, Apache, Comanche, and later the Cheyenne and Arapaho. Also, the Europeans arrived. What happened when the Europeans arrived? Well, a lot. It changed the whole area. The Spanish arrived in 1541. Francisco Vasquez de Coronado and his army came up the western side of Oklahoma. They were looking for gold, and they went clear up to Quinavera in Kansas, a Washita Indian village. Of course, there was no gold. Then they went back through the Panhandle. They found a flat desert-like land, and they were very disappointed. And you could see from this photo and many others that there's just a long ways where there's nothing, just flat land. The Spanish during the 1600s and 1700s developed a major trade route from Santa Fe, New Mexico to Natchitoches, Louisiana, called the Great Spanish Road. It entered Oklahoma at Eric near I-40 and traveled south along the North Fork Red River, crossing the river twice. The French arrived in the 1700s. Now, the French were quite different. They were looking for customers, and they encouraged the Indians to do commercial hunting so they could trade for European goods. Many of our rivers were named by the French. Around 1700 AD, horse herds arrived from northern Mexico and were adopted by the buffalo hunting tribes. So while the Indians were minding their own business, raising crops and hunting buffalo, the Europeans changed ownership of Old Greer County 14 times from 1669 to 1907. And I don't know what all the 14 times were, but I've seen several of them. One of them was in 1803 when the United States purchased the Louisiana Territory from France. And so then they decided on the Adams-Onis Treaty of 1821 to set the boundaries between Spain and the United States. This bridge crosses the North Fork Red River, and I walked across it. So on the far side, in the Quartz Mountain Park area, is Spain. And you walk across this bridge, and there you are in the United States. It was just that far away. The Republic of Texas became separate from Mexico on March 2nd, 1836. And so then in 1860, they created Greer County. as the land between the North Fork Red River, as you see going up all along here, and the Prairie Dog Town Fork of the Red River on the southern boundary, as well as the 100th meridian. The boundaries for this area have been disputed. Finally, in 1846, Texas joined the United States as a state. During the 1860s and 1870s, Old Greer County was a grazing ground for buffalo that were hunted by the Kiowa and the Comanche. Then things started to change. The Great Western Cattle Trail was developed between 1866 and 1885. And in the town of Mangrum, they have this wonderful wall mural depicting that, which you can see a part of it. They also have a sign explaining some of the activities of the Great Western Cattle Trail. East of Altus, there's also a sign showing the map of the Great Western Cattle Trail. And along the trail, you find these white posts with the writing on it. Along the Great Western Cattle Trail were the mesquite trees, which is unique to the western part of Oklahoma. And we saw this bird on the left is a ladderback woodpecker. These birds are not found in central Oklahoma, so it was really neat to find one of them down there. On the other hand, this blue grosbeak we found in the mesquite trees, and it was nesting in there because we found it there at least twice during our visits. But blue grosbeaks are also found in central Oklahoma. In 1879, Texas took over all the vacant lands and issued certificates to veterans for 640 acres. Well, the next year, the Day Land and Cattle Company of Texas bought many of these veteran certificates, and they also leased land from Texas and the Indians. And so ranchers arrived in Texas. Not only just this ranch, but many others arrived. And some of these ranches are still there today. By 1880, the buffalo and antelope are gone, but a few of the prairie dog towns remained. This bird on the left is a lark sparrow, which was hanging around the prairie dog town. I did not ever find a prairie dog town in Old Greer County, so these photos were taken from the Wichita Mountains. Then they had a gold rush in 1887. Mining in the area was prohibited, but many Native American ranches and fields were destroyed by prospectors before the Army came in and stopped them. Finally, the Supreme Court intervened. On March 16, 1896, the Supreme Court of the United States ruled that the Prairie Dog Town Forked Red River was the correct river boundary, and Old Greer County became part of the Indian Oklahoma Territory. So the Texas settlers could go ahead and apply for ownership of their homesteads. Soon, other people moved into Old Greer County and established homesteads and farms. And some of these are still there today. Oklahoma became a state in 1907. The settlers there plowed the prairie and raised cotton, wheat, and other crops. We were driving down the road between two cotton fields, and I couldn't find any birds, and we kept driving, and finally at the end of the road, a flock of birds came up. Oh, I don't know, 20 or 30 of them. And they were hanging out in the wheat fields. Well, it was brown on brown. You couldn't find the birds. And when you got too close, they flew away. Finally, if you look way down here on the left, you'll see a little juvenile bird hunting for insects. It's a juvenile horned lark. And so they like these cotton fields, and they go find a lot of insects in them to eat. In 1927, Lake Altus Lugert was created, and this is one of Oklahoma's fishing trails. So if you like to fish, you might want to look into this particular aspect. Well, during the 1930s, things changed. There was a nationwide depression, and if that wasn't bad enough, the climate became hot, dry, and windy. And then the prairie that they'd plowed up started to blow away. It caused huge, devastating dust storms. This had to end. We had to change our ways of managing the land. And so the nation began putting up tree shelter belts. The very first one was found in Greer County. And so they have a granite monument. And if you drive 1 mile north, you'll see the first shelter belt that was built in the United States or planted. And you can still find a lot of shelter belts in the area. Quartz Mountain State Park was started in 1936. At that time, 158.3 acres next to the lake was purchased by citizens of Greer County. They paid $51.58 to start the park. It was coordinated by the Oklahoma legislature, and today we have 4,540 acres. The CCC, the Conservation Corps Construction, came in from 1936 to 1940, building hiking trails, picnic areas, and boat ramps. In 1940, they reconstructed the Lugert Dam on the lake. And the lake provides water for 48,000 acres of farmland. So what was the area like in 2022? What kind of climate did we have? Plants, animals, and other factors that could be observed. We started in the town of Granite. Why is it named Granite? That's a rock. Oh yes, they mine the rock of granite in this town and create many different monuments. At one of their parks, they had this huge plaque to the giants of the Great Plains, and each one of these squares is a granite square. So it's just a huge area. Also in Granite, they have the Headquarters Mountain hiking trail. And so you can walk up one of the quartz mountains in this area. They also have a butterfly garden. In Mangum, the Hall of Fame pioneers of Old Greer County, they've taken these granite monuments and written the stories of the people who pioneered the area in the early days. And they have just a lot of people who were out there trying to start a life in this area. So what about water? Well, this was a dry year, and access to water is very important. One of the stops recommended was J. Buckle Springs, so my husband and I went out there. Well, we were kind of disappointed when we looked at it. It didn't look all that impressive. But then the neighbor came over and started talking. He said the Indians had an encampment up on the top of the hill. And then during the pioneer days, people would come here to get water to fill up their cisterns. Just that morning, a rancher came and filled up his tanks with water so he could take it back for his cattle. And on the weekends, people from the neighborhood area will come in and bring their children so they could go swimming in the pool. It is a very important part of the landscape. Water was so important, but how do you get it? As you can see from this old homestead, way in the back, you have your windmill, and then you store the water in the tank so that people can have water in their homes. Wells were also used. This particular well was hand dug in 1889 by Mr. Sam Neal. He homesteaded the lands that comprised downtown Altus, and it was the sole soft water supply for the town for several years. It's 35 feet deep. So just imagine digging 35 feet. And then he walled it with brick. It was rediscovered in 1989, and this restoration project is available where you can see it. It's located in the parking lot at the city courthouse in Altus. In February, we visited Lake Hall, which is a public fishing lake created by the Oklahoma Department of Wildlife. Not only fishing, but it also provides turkey hunting in the area. We found this cute little song sparrow hanging out by the edge of the water. Also, they had some interesting grasses. On the left is sand blue stem, and on the right is a maritime blue stem. Over at Lake Altus Lugert in February, they had hundreds and hundreds, thousands of ring-billed gulls. And if you look way in the back, you'll see some ducks. They also had a lot of ducks in the area. Pelicans were there visiting during the winter, And great blue herons, they live there year round. But the lake is dropped down tremendously, partly from the drought and partly from using the water for irrigation. But when it drops down, it creates this wonderful little marshland where you have a great variety of plants. I didn't go walking down there, so I'm not sure about what kind of critters are there. Over at Lake Altus, in the town of Altus in Jackson County, their water treatment plant area also has low water levels. And so they have a lot of interesting plants. We also found a red-eared slider turtle. And another visit, we found a yellow-crowned night heron along with other normal birds. We were driving down the road past this cattle pond and again slammed on the brakes and backed up. There was a cattle egret hanging out with them. He also had another buddy, a killdeer. In August, we found this solitary sandpiper near one of the ponds. And also in 2 different counties, we found upland sandpipers traveling through the area. What about the Rusty Roads? This is a county road in Greer County. And as you can see, down the middle, people drive. But over here on the edge, all kinds of interesting things happen. We found this thistle, and on it was a white-lined sphinx. But if you look behind the stem, there's another insect. And up in the upper corner, you can see a picture of it. It's some kind of bee with a really long nose. Growing along the dirt was this mimosa species. And I didn't know, but there's a lot of different mimosa species. And I'm not sure which one this one is. We also found verbenum with a bee on it. There was field bindweed. As you can see, it's growing all over the road. Here's a cowpen daisy. And another unknown yellow flower with an unknown insect. And again, an insect and a sunflower. And over here, this wasp-like critter was walking up and down the stem of it. Then there's silver-leaf nightshade. This is a highly poisonous plant and also one with a lot of stickers on it. There was an antelope milkweed with an orange bug behind it. And then we have this interesting plant. Also, this looks like a thistle type of thistle. And in the fall, we found snow in the mountain, which is a very pretty plant. There was trumpet vine, which is one of the pullouts on the highway had a whole row of trumpet vine, but I did not see a single hummingbird there. I'm not sure why they weren't in that area. We also found smooth sumac, which I've been told the Indians used to create a drink like a lemonade. Then there was oak trees. They have a different oak tree in this area than from central Oklahoma. And in the mesquite, we found an eastern red cedar growing. There was also a walnut tree. And a lot of western soapberries. The western soapberries often have birds hanging around it. Then I found a desert willow. This is a really cool plant, and I've seen them growing in central Oklahoma. They attract pollinators and are very tough. But what happens when you don't have any trees? Well, these red-headed woodpeckers didn't care. In 3 different counties, I found them nesting in telephone poles. Even though there were trees across on the other side of the road, they preferred the telephone poles. And this scissor-tail flycatcher, she was on the cross bars of the telephone poles, nesting. This is a Mississippi kite on a tree. Then we have the Bullock's oriole, which is different from the orioles that we have in central Oklahoma. Notice a big, large white spot on its wing, whereas the female doesn't have that much of white. This is, on the left is a Cassian sparrow, and on the right is an eastern kingbird. The Cassian sparrow is unique to western Oklahoma, but the kingbird travels all over the state. Then we have northern bobwhite. They were quite plentiful in this one area. And we found a greater roadrunner. The second time we visited this spot, there were 3 of them. This is a dick sisal. They come to Oklahoma in April, and then they leave in the fall. They're only about the size of a sparrow. But they look a lot like the meadowlarks. And the meadowlarks live here year-round, the eastern ones. And also we had hawks, the red-tailed hawk and the Swainson's hawk. Then there was American kestrels. In February, we found this group of white-crowned sparrows. The one with the black and white stripes on his head is an adult, but the other 3 are juveniles. And they were just taking a bath in this small puddle of water that they found. So what were some of the residents we found at Quartz Mountain? Well, they had cactus there. And this whole bank is common buttonbush. This is what the little flowers look like on a common buttonbush, and it really attracts a lot of pollinators. Most of them wouldn't stay still long enough for a photograph, but I did manage to catch this queen butterfly. Also growing around Quartz Mountain is the Texas live oak. These have green leaves even in the wintertime. The bridges crossing the North Fork Red River was an excellent place for the cliff swallows to make their nest, and they had hundreds and hundreds of them flying around the area. Then there's their nest with their little young ones sticking their heads out. Also at Quartz Mountain, we found northern mockingbirds, the one on the left, and then on the right, we was parking our car to unpack, and there was a summer tanager eating red mulberries. And that was the only time I saw the summer tanager. Hiding out in the trees, I could hear a blue-gray gnatcatcher, and finally it came out to where I could take a photo of it. These are really tiny, small birds. Up by the office was a juvenile Eurasian collared dove, and also a Carolina wren. In October, we heard a canyon wren singing at the cave that is located north of the lodge. And one of the ladies I talked to said she saw a porcupine in that area. Well, I guess I'm going to have to go back to find a porcupine. In February, I found this interesting titmouse, which is a little bit different than the others, and I finally figured out that it was a hybrid black-crested titmouse and a tufted titmouse. In the summertime, we found this juvenile black-crested titmouse. You can see that this little crest is black, and then when he opens his mouth, you can see the yellow showing that it's a juvenile. So why not plan a visit to Old Greer County and observe its many changes? For example, the population in 1910 in Harmon County was around 11,000, but by 2010, it was only 3,000. Greer County was in 1910 was about 16,500, but by 2010, it dropped down to 600,000. And Jackson County, it hasn't changed as much. In 1910, it was about 23,500, and by 2010, it was only 25,000. But the ones that moved out left behind some interesting houses and places. Oh, and the people down there do have a sense of humor. You can observe many of its wonder inhabitants and also the beautiful landscapes in the area. And other things you can find are flowers and pollinators, mammals and other different animals, and then lots and lots of birds. This year-old painting bunting invites you to watch the many changes that occur in Old Greer County over time, including next year when it's going to change to look like this. And so ends the 2022 adventure. What can we explore next?